So let's pray as we begin. And Lord, we thank you for this conference, Lord, for all the work that Ron put into organizing it. We thank you for Lloyd and this fellowship here that were so generous to host it. Thank you for all the people that helped with hospitality and the parking lot, serving food and stuff, Lord. The sound and video people and anyone else who's involved. And we pray that as we leave here and go back to our homes, wherever that may be, that you'll use something that we learned to improve our station, not just so that we can say that we're the best, but so that more lives and hearts would be touched, Lord. Thank you for your goodness and your graciousness to us, Lord. And we pray that you'll be here with us in this last session. Teach us some things we didn't know. And we thank you in Jesus' name. And everybody said, Amen. Amen. So originally our plan was to have a presentation. It kind of didn't get together in time. So we're hoping to have a more thorough presentation next year on cybersecurity. We have a whole year to plan it. So if we don't, it'll be just our own fault. So I suggested, since we didn't have a presentation, we have more of a Q&A. And maybe give a little bit of information first, and then follow that with a Q&A. Cybersecurity, I think, relates back to the history of human nature, and specifically our fallen nature. Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, and you and I. Man is sinful, and there's always somebody trying to get something that doesn't belong to him. And most of our problems are that. Some of them may be attributable to mistakes or errors, but more often than not, it's somebody who's trying to get something that doesn't belong to them. 20 years ago, if you mentioned the word cybersecurity or internet security or something like that, nobody would even know what you were talking about. But people were dishonest in Old Testament times. Adam and Eve, like we said, started out there. We can do better than God. We can be like God. We want to be God. Cain and Abel, right on down to the present day. In the Old Testament, they were told not to steal. Many times they buried their possessions. Don't move the property markers. That's one of my favorites. Don't move the property markers. That was stealing. Move the property markers so that your property was bigger and your neighbor was smaller. Eventually, they figured out how to put locks on doors. And as long as they've had locks on doors, they've had people that know how to pick the locks on doors. And then somebody came up with codes in the Middle Ages. They learned how to have secret codes, and some of them were primitive, and then they got more complicated. When World War II came along, the Germans had developed a code that was almost unbreakable, but the British managed to break it, and that turned the war around. And the internet basically runs on codes. You could think of it as that way, ones and zeros, numbers. And security is all provided by different kinds of mathematical algorithms that are too complicated for us to talk about here today, but I think we want you to know that they're there. And there's all kinds of fraud on the internet. People pretending to be something that they're not, websites that would like to get your credit card information, emails that people send you. You get them all the time. We're ready to deposit the funds in your bank account. Simply fill out this form so we can do that. Somebody sent me a picture of a vault filled with gold bars just last week. Just all these gold bars, and it said, Nigerian man died with all this gold. He couldn't get anyone to take it. People try to steal money from banks. They go into and hold up a bank, ATM machines. They figured out how to get money out of ATM machines using all kinds of things. They implant into gas pumps at gas stations little things that'll read your credit card. When you pull into the gas station and put your credit card in, it'll read your credit card number and send it by wireless to the crooks somewhere who now have your credit card number. When you use an ATM machine, they tell you to cover the keypad with your other hand so no one can see what you're typing. It's not uncommon for hackers to attack ATM machines They employ they get on board with the service people who service them. They'll install their own reader that you can't even see that'll steal your credit card number, and they even install a little camera to record your fingers hitting your PIN code in, so that you can know it, or so that they can know it. There's fraud everywhere. You know, you lock your front door. Many people say, we didn't used to lock our front doors, now we do. The truth is, many of us, where I live, if I failed to lock my front door Monday when I came here, chances are, you know, most likely when I got back, nobody would have gone into my house. But if you forget to protect your computer, somebody will get into it, often within minutes. There's so much stuff going on out there. If you read the news from time to time, you see different ways that radio stations have been hacked. At least one or more times, somebody got into a barracks box at a transmitter site and changed the address it was pulling its audio from, and all of a sudden the station found out they were broadcasting pornographic material or worse. People get into your EAS box and mess with that. And next thing you know, you're transmitting a code for an alert that didn't happen. So there's a lot of bad actors out there, and sometimes people say, what would never happen to me? We just run a small radio station in a small town. Nobody's really trying to get us. They don't really care about us. We're not significant. But hackers on the internet are just scanning ranges of IP addresses, finding what they can get into. They don't care if it's a radio station or a bank or somebody's home computer. They go to work and leave their computer running, scanning for vulnerabilities, and if they hit your IP address and they can get in, then they like to play around. There are companies in Russia and China, companies that employ people. People go to work every day in these companies, and their job is to hack into U.S. businesses and steal things. They're off on the weekends, they go home at night to be with their kids, they have holidays and sick time and all that kind of stuff, but their job during the week, their job is to see what they can hack into and get for free. And I've had clients in my IT business that have been hacked and lost lots of money because of it. So it's very important for us to it's important for us to have security on our systems. At the very least, everybody should have a firewall. And no, they don't get hot. There's no fire in it, but a firewall. It's very important to have antivirus software on your computer. It's very important to update your computer because hackers find something out, and if you don't update it, somebody's going to take advantage of that. A couple of years ago, somebody figured out that video cameras that are used in security had some kind of hole in them, and there was a whole virus that went around infecting people's video cameras, and it was used to shut down websites. Every time somebody shows me on their iPhone, oh look, I can see my living room right here on my iPhone. I have a video camera in there. I think to myself, so can the Chinese see your living room, even if you think you have security. So Jim Stowe is with us. Jim works for a bank in Northwest Pennsylvania. He does IT work for a bank, which involves some stuff related to security. Jared Randall from Hope FM, he works for Comcast, specifically in the field of security. So what we're going to do, I asked each of them to share just for a few minutes anything that comes to their mind that might be of interest to us in the radio world. And then once we finish the introduction, we're going to have some questions. So, Jim?
Like Bill said, I'm Jim Stowe. I'm the assistant pastor at Calvary Chapel in Russell, PA, up in northwestern PA. And I also work as a systems engineer for Northwest Bank. I've been working in information technology for more than 30 years. I have an undergraduate degree in computer science and done grad work at Colorado State in artificial intelligence, specifically neural networks and genetic algorithms.
You're smart.
No. We saved the smart guy for last. So,
Artificial intelligence is what politicians have, in case you were wondering what that is. Somebody asked for a definition of it.
not real intelligence. So I've been working in the field for a while. I've worked as a technology director for a school district. So, as well as working for the bank, I was a LAN and WAN administrator for a small company managing 5 sites. So most of my security responsibilities have been tacked on to local area network and wide area network administration. Basically, I was the last guy left without a seat when the music stopped playing. So it was important for me to start to understand perimeter security as well as endpoint security. And but the guy you really want to listen to is Jared, because he may or may not tell you this, but he actually has, as well as the work he does at Comcast, he actually has what is the industry's most highly prized security credential, which is the CISSP. It is a non-trivial certification with an equally non-trivial test. The guys that pass that test, they're superheroes in information security. So, Jared.
So according to ISC Squared, I actually don't have the exam because I don't have the 5 years of professional work experience. So I'm considered an associate. So I don't have the exam, but I did pass it. So I've been in IT for several years. I've been working with Comcast in security for the past 3.5 years. I did my graduate work in national and homeland security management. Prior to that, I got a cybersecurity degree. And I've known Bill ever since I've been at Marlton for the past 5 or so years, and been wanting to help out with Hope FM. And Bill's like, oh, well, when you finish your bachelor's, you can help out with Hope FM. Well, I started my master's, and it was, okay, well, after you finish your master's, you can start with Hope FM.
Because we only let people help if they have a master's.
Yeah.
Well,
Keep setting that bar higher.
yeah, don't have time. So this has been really cool for me to be here at the radio conference the first time. It was kind of a trial by fire, and learning everything that it is that you guys do, and recognizing, yeah, you've got some systems that's a web server. You need a firewall. You have all these remote sites, working with Bill, going out to all the different sites and upgrading the hardware, and kind of recognizing, yeah, this is the stuff that I deal with. The only difference is you've got a lot of RF and you're streaming audio from one location to the other, and you have to get it out, an antenna. And as Bill said, with the Merari botnet that happened a few years ago, it was mostly IP cameras, but it was basically any IoT, Internet of Things device, that was vulnerable. And the theme that I've seen through here is that there is spiritual warfare. And there are many things that you guys are doing that are connected to the internet and that have varying attack vectors that the enemy will love to use. And as Matt said before, his server got compromised. I don't know how it got compromised, but if it was connected to the internet, or if it wasn't air-gapped, as we like to say, and someone plugged in an infected USB flash drive on there and brought the system down. There are a lot of security tools that you guys can use. Bill talked about firewalls. Hope you all have a firewall, know how to configure it properly. Antivirus, all of the various tools that are at your disposal, a lot of free stuff. Even you guys that are using Linux, you're not completely free, and there are plenty of free tools for you to use. And as we said, that we are hoping to get a presentation on to talk about remote access or something in that regard, because we know a lot of you need to do those remote access. You need to remote into your PCs, your various systems that are at the remote sites. Hopefully we'll do that next year, or we'll curtail that to any of the questions that come out from this. So we're here for your questions.
Good. So before we do questions, though, So sometimes you hear people say, what is a firewall? And why do I need one? I'd like to, maybe Jim can address that just for a minute or two, just give a big,
So a firewall is a network security device that is on your network that monitors ingress and egress traffic. And it will take action based on rules that you configure. There are different types of firewalls that will take action based on the rules, whether I want to disallow everything but only allow port 80 or only allow 443. You have other firewalls that will monitor the traffic and look for nuances or attacks and take action based on that. But it's basically a device, it's a gatekeeper. So it's checking the traffic that's coming into your network and leaving your network. I guess like what Mike Smith did with Bill. Normally, you explicitly deny all traffic in and you implicitly allow all traffic out. But I know that Mike Smith is a little bit more secure than that, and he just blocks everything and only allows what he knows should be on the network.
good,
Add anything
yeah.
to
That's our policy at Hope FM. Somebody told me, oh, you don't block outgoing stuff. We block everything unless we know what it is, because there are bad guys out there. And I think the best way to imagine the internet is as a big, giant party line. And when I was a kid, we had a party line. And if you pick up the phone and somebody else on the party line was using it, you had to hang back up. If you picked it up and you got a dial tone, that's when you could turn the crank and make your call. The internet's a big party line. Everybody's talking at the same time. And if they can find you and get into your network, they can play with your stuff, which is what we don't want to do. So we block everything.
And it's not a bad thing, especially when you're not an average home office or small office, because say one of your machines gets infected and starts sending out spam, and then your IP gets blacklisted, and then your ISP shuts it down, and then you're off the air. And you're off the air until who knows when you get your IP off that blacklist.
Okay.
Jim, I wanted Jim to just address VPNs for a minute. Just maybe define what a VPN is.
Sure.
I'm trying to be proactive. I wanted to at least define firewalls and VPNs, and then we can go into the question. So what's a VPN? Why do I need one? How hard is it to set it up? Just a short synopsis.
Sure. Just a little bit about firewalls. We've got a real world, now this would not be, it's not a perfect example because it's not rigidly enforced, but we kind of have an example here of a firewall. If you can imagine the entire outside world is the internet, and what we have in here, this is the conference. You know, we want to participate. This is where the information that we need is. You can imagine each one of these doors in the back as being an entry port, right? It's an entry port and an exit port from this location. And we don't have people at those doors, but you can imagine if there were people at these doors and they were enforcing rules, they were checking our badge. Let me take a look. Do you have a badge? If you have a badge, you're able to get in. You don't have a badge, you're not allowed to get in. That's exactly how a firewall works on your network. Only the traffic, only the information that you are permitting to enter your network and exit your network gets in or out based on the rules that you defined. That's really the first layer of perimeter security. What a VPN is, it's a virtual private network. You know that the way that a network works is, you know, you have at least two endpoints. You may have your automation, for example, might have your automation computer, which is actually playing the audio that is going out over the transmitter, and a production computer, where you do all your production work. That's where you're recording your liners, where you're downloading the teaching programs. Now you can connect those two things together very simply by, you know, you plug them into, you know, plug a network cable from them into a switch and you've created a network. What a virtual private network is you can imagine that what you're doing is you're creating an imaginary, very long network cable that is traversing the internet. And since it's going over the internet, maybe from your studio at the church or wherever to the transmitter site, because it's traversing the internet, it's important that at each endpoint something is happening so that that traffic is being encrypted. It's being coded so that any listeners who are able to intercept that traffic between those two endpoints, what they're going to get is they're going to get gibberish. Now, you can connect two endpoints, you can connect any two endpoints through the internet, but that doesn't mean that it's secure. What a VPN allows you to do is it allows you to secure that connection, so it's just as if you were plugging in a very long Ethernet cable between those two endpoints. There's some very sophisticated VPN systems, but as with most things, you can set up a very simple VPN, and you can do it for free using OpenVPN and a couple Linux boxes at each endpoint.
We use all the free stuff at Hope FM. We never like to pay for software. We pay for a lot of hardware.
Is free cheap or is it just free?
Free is cheap, but also free. I don't know. What's your point?
It's free.
It's free, yeah.
It won't be cheap.
It's free. So
Okay.
let's spend some time having some questions, and
We'll have
maybe
some
that'll drive
questions.
our discussion.
Can I ask one thing of you three? I feel like I have a pretty good idea of technical things, but when it comes to networking, who else? It right over their head. So try to dumb it down as best you can in the best words that you. I love the illustration of coming into the room. That helped me understand a firewall. I would have never understood it better than that. Amen? So there's a lot of non-technical people in here, but we all know that this is important, super important. So let's get first what your recommendation would be, obviously the firewall, and how maybe you could remote in and help some of these stations get secure, at least for now, and then help them give them a plan, moving forward from that. I think that's important. Like Bill said, make sure your EAS has a different password. Make sure that your, everything that you have not the default admin. Yes? Let me get to Ben.
Yeah, just one more thing, Ron. It's important, and again, it's easy to get kind of down in the weeds and lost in the minutia. It's easy for guys like me to begin to technobabble. My wife tells me I do that all the time, especially when I start talking in acronyms. He said, please use your words, not acronyms. And I have to be reminded of that. But it's important, regardless of what our technical ability is, when we're thinking about security, there are some general principles that we all need to keep in mind. And they're the same things that we think about for physical security. And one of the most important principles, Jared and I were talking about this yesterday, you cannot eliminate risk, you can only mitigate risk. You can do everything you can to reduce your risk, but keep in mind you're never going to be able to completely eliminate it. What your goal should be, whether it's at your home, your station, your church, whatever, your goal should be to make sure that you are not low-hanging fruit. Because attackers, like anyone who's exploiting your physical security, are lazy. And if somebody comes to my door, they come to my car, and they find that it's locked, chances are they're going to move on to find a car or a door that is unlocked. If they come to a door with a lock and a deadbolt, they're going to move on to a door that just has a regular key lock. That's what we have to do to mitigate risk. A general principle is don't allow yourself to be low-hanging fruit. Make sure that you've changed, just like you said, Ron, make sure you've changed from default passwords. Use passwords that are more complex than just 8 characters, that include special characters. Even better, instead of using passwords, begin to use passphrases that are longer. Just some of those general principles. Think to yourself, because we're thinking, how can I make it for someone impossible to attack me? Well, you can't. But what you can do is think, how can I make it harder for someone to attack me so that they move on and unfortunately try and attack someone else?
What's for a remote login? What's your opinion of Windows remote desktop login versus TeamViewer?
Well, I can tell you that at the bank, we do use Windows Remote Desktop. However, We only use it when we are connected to another machine through a VPN, a virtual private network, so that the traffic between those 2 points is all encrypted. It's all in code. So if anyone was to intercept it, it would be garbage. Again, this does speak to general principles. For the radio station, I don't use RDP. I actually use another product called VNC. It's free. But a general principle is if you are using RDP, remote desktop, see, I'm doing it again. Already, I'm talking in acronyms. If you use Microsoft's remote desktop protocol, remote desktop, its default port is 3910? 3389. That's something that should be changed. When we run remote desktop, I always make sure that I change what its default port is, because again, it takes, if someone is scanning my network from the outside, it takes a long time to scan all 65,535 ports. So what they're probably going to scan for are just the known ports that are most likely to be, just like they're only going to look for the doors that they know about. They're not going to look for every possible entrance into a room. So I make sure that anything that has a known port, if I can change it, I do change it. I do the same with the VNC. The default port for VNC, the remote software that I use, is 5901 or 5900. That's changed for every one of my machines so that they're not hitting the known port.
I think TeamViewer does establish a VPN. My experience with TeamViewer has always been remote support where someone's able to bring up the app on the other side. So in the case where you have someone on the other side, that's great. Whereas remote desktop, you're able to get on even if the screen is locked. It's just a login.
Go ahead.
There's also a potential legal issue. TeamViewer is technically free for personal use, but
Also for non-commercial.
is it also for non-commercial?
Yes,
Okay.
we had an issue with them, and all you have to do is, there was someone else that told me that. They had like a 3-week process with TeamViewer. Eventually, they let them know that they were a church and nonprofit, and TeamViewer eventually said, okay, but you have to work at it. So don't be, when you get that screen that's going to say, oh, you're a commercial entity. No, you can call them or email them and say, no, here's the proof, I am nonprofit. So just note that you just got to do a little work. Well, you're a corporate. Yeah, so if, the church and the radio station is nonprofit, hence.
And besides being nonprofit, I think everybody in this room knows Calvary chapels are just cheap. So, we're a nonprofit. We don't like to spend money.
Yes, Kevin. Hold on, let me get around. Not you, Kevin.
While we're waiting, I just want to say that a VPN, we do everything at Hope FM with VPN. So we use OpenVPN, which is free software. We use pfSense for our firewalls. That's a Unix-based firewall appliance. The software is free. You have to buy the hardware for it to run on. So if I want to use my laptop to connect to our studio, the first thing I do is start up the VPN software, and the VPN software connects me through a secure tunnel to the studio. It's like Jim said, a long imaginary cable that runs from where I am to where the studio is, even if it's on the other side of the world. And once I'm connected then, I have a secure connection. It's just like I'm right there. And then whether you want to use since we run everything on Unix, we use all free software like PuTTY and WinSCP to access our Unix servers. The software you use is almost irrelevant as long as you have a secure connection so that no one else can see what you're doing.
Is anyone running virtual environments? No?
Does anyone know what a virtual environment is? Yeah. So we'll skip over that.
We'll skip over that.
Yeah.
My question is, how do we scan our ports so we know what's open, what's not open, so we can fix it if we have everything open now?
Sorry, Joanna, one thing. So what he's talking about is there's a station that's got a server, and I'm not remembering the software, but I will later, that's running 2 virtual machines. one virtual machine is the on-air machine that's running station playlist, Creator Studio, and then the second virtual machine is running Creator and its production. And it's been problematic.
Bob, you had some?
Yeah, I don't think we answered
My
Kevin's.
question was about
We didn't
VNC.
answer Kevin's question yet, did we?
Deal with Kevin first.
No.
No, I want to know, how do you scan your ports, see if your firewall's working or not? Is there any way you can scan it for free?
Personally, I use Nmap, Network Map Scanner.
And it'll tell you what, Jared?
You can get it to be very granular, but you can point it at an IP address, and it will tell you all of the ports that it finds. You can scan all 65,535, or you can always scan for a certain range of ports, but you can scan whatever you want, and it'll tell you whatever it finds. Also, based on if you have a firewall, it will let you know if it received a response. It will say that you received a blocked response, this port is blocked, or it will time out. And those are also things that you can configure if you want that port to notify someone that this port is closed, or this port just doesn't exist and it'll move on to the next port. Do you have any other tools that you use?
Well, the software itself is called Nmap, N-M-A-P, and the graphical front end for it used to be called ZenMap, Z-E-N-M-A-P. It is, it's not particularly difficult software to use. There are a lot of presets. The important thing is where you're scanning from. So you need to, basically you need to think of yourself as an attacker if they are attempting to compromise the machine or, your transmitter at your transmitter site. You need to know what the public-facing IP address is at your transmitter site, and that's what you're going to run. You can be at home or be at the church. That's what you're going to run your scan against.
You have to be somewhere else.
Yeah, you got to be somewhere else,
if you
because
wanna-
if you're scanning inside the network, then you're not imitating an attack.
If you want to make sure people can't get into your network, so you're going to scan your network, you have to be somewhere else, anywhere else, just not there, so that you can see, can I get in remotely?
If you want to scan off of your WAN port or your WAN port, then you need to be outside of your network. If it's just a box on your local network and you have a private IP that you want to scan, you can scan from another private IP address.
Okay, hold on.
2 or 3 quick questions. Most of these network tools I learned in Unix 40 years ago, and they seem to have the
That's
same
when they had
names.
cranks on the side of the computer,
That's right.
Bob?
Yes. And
You had a
are they
Spark-
still the
Spark
same
app
tools
transmitter?
available in Windows? Do people do this in Windows now? And the second question is, do you recommend Unix over Windows for security? I think I know where Bill stands on that. And finally, the third question is, VNC has always been my standard for communicating between computers. Is there any reason to abandon it after all these years? Is it now got porous, or is it still good?
Actually, most of the tools, fortunately, most of the tools and all the tools that we've mentioned so far, including the ones that Bill mentioned, PuTTY, which is a terminal emulator, Nmap is both a Unix tool and the graphical front end ZenMap. It does run under Windows. There is a version of PuTTY for Windows. I don't think we've WinSCP. There's also a version of WinSCP that runs under Windows. I work in a Windows environment. It does lead to your second question about if you would recommend Linux over Windows from a security standpoint. You have to be as smart as Bill Lukeman to be able to effectively run Linux. So you got to be.
I don't think that's true.
No, you don't. Linux is arguably more secure in the sense that there are more people who they're working on that. It has a larger community supporting it. They have a vested interest in keeping it secure. It's also arguably more secure because of the concept of security through obscurity. It is a harder environment to navigate. It's harder to come up to speed, and so since it's a little more obscure, some people consider that more secure. But the tools are there basically for whatever environment you're running in.
And look, you know, we use Unix because we like it, okay? But most people don't like it, or they don't know how to use it. The fact is, Unix runs the internet. When Microsoft bought, I'm trying to think what company it was, but Microsoft bought a company, they were running all their stuff on Unix. Microsoft changed it all to Windows, and then changed it all back when they found out Windows didn't do it. But Windows is great for desktops. We all use Windows on our desktops. And I use these Windows-based tools on my desktop to communicate with our servers that are running Unix. I don't really want to have a debate on that because most people are going to run Windows. It's more convenient. They know how to use it. There's a greater pool of people who know what to do with it. So, you know, we're going to run Windows. And all these concepts we're talking about, these ideas for security, really, they're the same and they apply across the board to no matter what kind of operation you're running.
Bob, you mentioned the last tool, VNC, as a way to communicate, you know, a way to remotely connect to another machine. I use VNC as well. That's my standard. VNC versus remote desktop from Microsoft versus TeamViewer versus LogMeIn. Really, it's just a question of what you're comfortable with, because all of the tools basically do the same thing. I use VNC because it has some specific features that I like. I have some slow network links, and I'm able to choose the quality of the graphics display to be less so that it works over those slow links. But basically, they do all do the same thing. And the important thing, again, like Bill was saying, any of those tools, as long as you're running over a VPN, a secure tunneled connection, they're all equally secure at that point.
And as another option for you remote desktop users, one of the things that I do at work is we tunnel over SSH. We use PuTTY to create basically a VPN between two systems, and then we remote desktop over that. So although the remote desktop is not encrypted, it's going through a tunnel. That would be considered the poor man's tunnel, using SSH over port 22 between two systems. You can do that with PuTTY. You can do that with a Linux server and install the Open SSH server. It gives you the same thing that OpenVPN would do for Windows boxes.
Hey, so I just wanted to point out, I have a Comrex or Barracks box in my studio, and one of them we were using had a public IP so that our hosts could call in from other places. And it's really important to lock down anything that has a public IP. I just wonder if you guys could talk to that and talk to some of the other security issues with the devices that are on Linux boxes, the Barracks boxes, Comrex boxes, audio equipment and routing stuff, Axios stuff, if you don't mind.
There's two thoughts on sending your transmitted audio to the transmitter site through the internet, through a Barracks box or a Comrex or a Tie-Line Bridget or something along those lines. One school of thought would be to have a VPN tunnel between your sites. And we have at least one tunnel between a pair of our sites. That's where you have a firewall at each end, and you have a tunnel between them, and the traffic traverses through the tunnel. It's up all the time. We can be at one site, and we can see the equipment at the other site through that tunnel. That's very common, but we have a lot of sites. We decided not to have VPN tunnels to all of our sites. So we use Comrex mostly now, and we put the Comrex on a particular port, and that one port is available from the outside because we decided if a hacker wanted to hack into that port and listen to our programming, that would be okay with us since we broadcast it over the air. So all of our equipment's behind firewalls. You can't log into the Comrex box remotely. You can't get to the web browser interface on the Comrex box. We felt the security of the Comrex box. By the way, they run a version of Linux also. Almost every appliance runs Linux. Your Comrex box, your Bridget, I don't know what the Bridget uses. Nautel transmitters, the Sage Index for EAS, they all run Linux. And the reason they all run Linux, it's simple and it's free to them. So that's probably the main reason they do it. But we don't put our audio in tunnels because we didn't feel we wanted to protect our audio from hackers. But I can VPN into any of our sites. We have 11 accounts with Comcast, several accounts with Verizon. Not all of our sites have internet. But if we have internet at the site, we can VPN in, we can access the equipment at that site through the VPN. But the actual audio is not secure. And we didn't feel that was necessary. We thought the hardware was good enough that we could trust it. And that may or may not be true. Somebody could possibly get into your barracks box and through that get into something else. So when you do open a port like that, we have a VoIP phone system. And so there are certain ports that are open to our phone system. And the phone maker says, our system is hardened, nobody can get in through this. Well, you know, it's a point of exposure. You're trusting them on that. Unfortunately, with the phone system, you have to do that. With the audio, you have a choice.
You bring up a good point about public IP addresses. Just to make sure that we're all on the same page about this, every networked device has to have a unique address. Okay, it's in 4 digits separated by periods. There are basically 2 varieties of that. There are public IP addresses, which they're public facing. Everything that is on the internet, every device that you can access on the internet has a public IP address. There are private IP addresses. Those are addresses that are used inside of a local area network. For example, you can imagine each one of these seats. If each one of these seats had an individual number, that would be a private IP address for each seat. Each seat would have its own unique number. If you wanted to communicate with someone from one seat to another, you would need to know their address so that you could go to that place to communicate. You can imagine that the network equipment, your barracks box, whatever, there are 2 philosophies. One is that you give that barracks box or a Comrex or a tie line, you actually give it a public IP address and you are exposing it to the internet. That would be, for our case, that would be like taking any one of our speakers who's been here at the conference and putting them out in the parking lot. They are accessible to anyone in the world. What we do for all of our equipment is we make sure that none of our equipment has public-facing IP addresses. All of our equipment at the transmitter site and at the studio, we use private IP addresses, so they cannot be accessed from the outside. But of course, you know, we have to get to them some way. And so what we do is we have our firewall, and our firewall uses a technology called port forwarding. And it's smart enough so that if I want to access my barracks box, I'm not going to access it directly. My communication is going to hit my firewall. And my firewall is going to do 2 things. It's going to say, okay, first, is this coming from an IP address that I know? And it knows the IP address for my house. It knows the IP address for the church. And if it's not coming from a public address that it knows, it says, forget it. I'm not going to listen. I don't know who this is coming from, so I'm just going to drop that traffic. Then it's also going to ask, is this coming on a port that I know about? Let's say port 6000. So it says, okay, it's coming from a place I know. This is coming from Jim Stowe's house. It's coming in on a port that I know to do something with, port 6000. When I get something on port 6000, that means I take this traffic, this communication, and I send it to the internal device with this IP address. And then the traffic gets routed accordingly. So on our networks, when, at the transmitter site, at all of our transmitter sites, at the studio, there's only one device that has a public IP address, and that is our router firewall. It's the gatekeeper for the entire network. Anything that has to be accessed inside of those networks, it's all privately addressed, and the traffic gets forwarded accordingly. Something about VPNs that we didn't mention. VPNs, they sound great. They're great when you can do it. They are a little more difficult to set up, and something that we haven't addressed. VPNs, and it's true for any form of security, VPNs add overhead. Okay? So imagine that the connection between your studio and your church, imagine it's a pipe that's 4 inches wide. Well, if you set up a VPN between those two locations, you've taken some of that capacity and you've reduced it, maybe by an inch, because there's additional traffic, there's additional overhead that's used for that VPN. That's great if you're going from a 4-inch pipe down to a 3-inch pipe, no problem. But at some of our sites, we're in a very rural area, some of our sites, we only have a 1-inch pipe. And if we were to try and create a VPN and take our 1-inch pipe down to a 1/4 inch, that's going to be a problem. And so we have to find other ways to secure those locations.
Right, and that's exactly what we do also. I neglected to say that, but everything has a private IP address. And we only have one public-facing IP address. And that's for our church, our school, and our radio station. All of our office computers, our phone system, anything to do with the radio station, there's one IP address because we're too cheap to pay for more, but also because you don't need more, because you can use port forwarding, and that's why you can't access any of our equipment remotely without coming in through the VPN. We use port forwarding, so our firewall knows certain port request comes in, we route it to that device. And we only do that in a limited number of places and only if we know what it is. This stuff can all be controlled, and it may be a lot of work, may be rather methodical, but when you go through it, you wind up with something that's more secure.
All right, just for clarity, to go back to the free things like TeamViewer or Go to My PC, those things, those are not creating their own VPNs, are they? If you
Well, I wouldn't use Go to My PC because that's an outside service.
Right.
That's unaffiliated with your network, and they have a way to log into your computer, and they're maintaining, you have a username and a password with them.
Yes.
So now you're at the mercy of their security. And if somebody hacks their list of usernames and passwords, and look, you see every day, Facebook just got hacked. Oh, we're so sorry, only 50 million accounts got compromised. Somebody sat in the parking lot of Target, and downloaded all this credit card information. Mike Smith was hired to do penetration testing for a computer company a year or so ago. He parked in the parking lot. In a short amount of time, he accessed their wireless network, which was secure, and I think in the order of 15 minutes. Then he accessed their internal monitoring video cameras and printed out pictures of what the employees were doing from the parking lot. Then he accessed the phone of the chief security guy and put on his phone display something like, oops. And, he gave him a list. So you can engage somebody like that to do penetration testing. Well, there's people out there stealing passwords. They look at Go to My PC and say, if we can get that list of passwords, and there are ways to get it in some cases, and if they can crack yours, and they don't care about Scott at Calvary Chapel of Lynchburg, they just have a list of 1 million passwords, and they run it through their algorithms, and whichever ones pop out that they can get, they try to hack in. So a VPN is your own private encrypted tunnel that you set up between you and your transmitter site. And once you do that, then you can do anything you want and know that it's secure.
Okay, so, but a VPN is point-to-point.
Yes.
It's not portable. I can't, if I have a VPN set up, I can't be at my friend's house and access the VPN, or can I?
Oh, you have it on your laptop. You can have it on your laptop.
But I mean, if I'm using his computer, I've got to install something on that computer?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I mean. It's device specific.
Yes.
I mean, you got to have the software. I just can't go to a site or something because services like Go to My PC or Log Me In, you can access that from anywhere. But that's insecure because they're not creating a VPN, right? That's you're just going over the web from one place. You're going through them, but like he said, depending on their security. Okay, so then VPNs are device specific from one place to the other. So then, I mean, if you're in a scenario, if you've got a VPN set up, but then, you're somewhere and you don't have your laptop or you don't have your computer and you need to get in, what is there an alternative? Is there something to do, or like?
Yes, be prepared. My laptop is in my car.
Okay, right.
Right.
So
My laptop's in my car. I'm going to Israel next week. My laptop will be with me.
Okay.
right? I don't ever go anywhere. Look, if you go to and another thing, you take your laptop into a hotel and get on the free public Wi-Fi in the hotel, you're exposing yourself to, the potential security risk there. So go to My PC and services like that. They cater to people who are in a hurry and lazy and unprepared, and hopefully they won't read this or see this, but they make it easy for you. But when you make it easy, it's less secure. It's so easy to carry your laptop with you or your netbook or your notebook. Look, you can access OpenVPN from an iPad or an iPhone.
Okay.
And so you can, from your iPhone, you can have the OpenVPN client on your phone. You could probably get one for Android also. You can access your system, use the web browser. If you're accessing a web browser, you can do all that from your phone.
That's
but
where I was going to go next.
If you need a laptop,
Yes,
have
okay.
it with you.
Okay, so you could, on a mobile device, you could do something like that. Thank you. That's where I was going to go next.
VNC as well. And, it's just like, Bill had mentioned that, it's a question of how hard is it versus how easy. If I have 3 locks on my door, it's harder to get into my door. I have to have 3 keys or 3 combinations than it is if I only have 1 lock. Same thing is true for the levels of security we're describing. Having a VPN is extremely secure. However, there are more hoops to jump through to access that. A little bit lower level of security is, since we don't use a VPN, would be VNC, because VNC is it's a piece of software. It is free. There are several VNC. VNC is actually the technology. There are several flavors, several clients that you can use to run VNC for remotely connecting to a machine. And we use VNC because we can encrypt the traffic. It's not truly a VPN, but what it is it is encrypted, secure communication from one endpoint to another endpoint. It's the same technology that's used when you see the little lock come up on your browser when you're ordering something from Amazon. It's SSL, the secure socket layer.
So Android VNC is one that you can use from an Android phone or tablet. There's, I'm sure, a version on an Apple product as well. But could you speak to something that is maybe a little less technical, but equally dangerous in the area of cybersecurity, human exploits, human engineering? Kevin Mitnick, Ghost in the Wires, and so on. Maybe you'd like to speak a little bit about how, without a computer, the man broke into computers.
I'm not really up on Kevin
Well,
Mitnick, so,
It's true. Social engineering is, it's like we always used to say, people are the problem. We can secure machines. We have this issue at the bank a lot. We do a lot of training in security to make sure that people are trained, because we can only do so much to secure the systems, but you recognize there's a warm body sitting behind the keyboard, and they're easy to exploit. So, training, keeping yourself informed is an important part of, the more informed we are, the harder we are to attack. And with any electronic, I would just say this, with any electronic communication, it is important to approach any electronic communication with a high level of skepticism. Our inclination is to trust, because most of us come from a print background. Most of us aren't digital natives. Most of us grew up with print, and we've been drug into the digital world. And what that means is we tend to have a bias to believe something if we see it in print. When you receive an email, you should immediately be skeptical about where that email came from, especially if it includes a link for you to click. And there's some, I never click a link in an email, even if it's coming from a trusted source, because I don't know where my trusted source, my wife could send me an email. Now, I trust my wife. I know her email address. I can look at the header on that email to see it actually came from her school account. But she may actually be forwarding me a link from somebody else, and the link that's been forwarded is actually a phishing link, phishing, something that they want me to click. So I never click on a link until I use my mouse to hover over that link and see where it's really going to send me. You can usually see down in the status bar. You hover over a link, it may say, the link may show www.amazon.com. The email address says, hey, I just saw this for sale on Amazon. I'm sure that it's something you'd be interested in. Check it out. I look at the link, it says Amazon.com. Oh, no problem. I click that link. The link itself doesn't take me to Amazon.com. It takes me to a page that looks like the login page for Amazon.com, where I foolishly put in my username and password. And then it comes back and says, oh, no, that was incorrect, and wants me to do it again, and then I get to the right page. Well, what happened was I didn't actually go to Amazon.com. I went to a site that was imitating it, and I just gave them my username and password. And once they captured that information, then they sent my traffic to the real Amazon.com. One of the ways to mitigate against that is before you ever click on a link, use your mouse to hover over that link and make sure, when you look in the status bar, make sure that link is taking you to the same place that the link actually says it's taking you to. Be very skeptical of any telephone call. I always, when I receive a telephone call, if it is something that they are asking me to disclose information, I always ask for a callback number, and then I generally go to the website for whatever organization it is and compare the callback number they gave me with the public callback number that organization advertises. So it's just approaching every communication with a high level of skepticism, because as Bill said, there are a lot of bad actors, and they rely on our trust, and they rely on their ability in a lot of cases to intimidate us. I get a phone call that the guy on the other end of the phone says, I want to confirm your address. Are you still at 101 North Main Street? And I said, as far as I know, yes, I'm still there. It says, okay, I just want to let you know that sometime within the next 48 hours, the police will be there. They have a warrant for your arrest because of unpaid back taxes. I said, whoa, 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 whoa. Who is this exactly? Oh, well, this is the Internal Revenue Service. I said, you know what? I didn't receive any certified mail from you people. I know that you don't actually call people to announce that they're going to be arrested. I knew it was a scam. But they went on and they tried to intimidate me into giving them additional information. And that's an easy thing. It happens all the time.
We got a call at the church, and my secretary called me all frantic. We have to pay the electric bill, or they're going to turn off the electricity within the hour. They must have not got our payment. And they left this number to call them back. Well, I'm not going to call that number they left. I'm going to call the electric company. I'm going to look on my electric bill, call the electric company. And they said, nope, you don't owe us any money, and you're not the only person to call. Those are scammers that are going around. They prey on old people. They can tell you that you owe taxes and you're going to be arrested. I've had that happen to me. I just hang up on them. I just pretty much hang up on everybody. But, when you get an email, I tell our staff, I have a form email that I send to our staff every 3 months on the first day of each quarter that has the rules for clicking on attachments. It can say www.amazon.com. It can say that, but if you hover over it with your mouse and you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see the real link that's hidden behind that, which could be something completely different. So I always tell our staff, never click on any link and don't open any attachment unless, number one, you know the person it's coming from, number two, you know what it is, and number three, you were expecting it. And all three conditions have to be true. So if you weren't expecting it, then confirm with that person. I send back to friends that send me links. What is this? You send me a link. What is this? And if it's a friend, they'll say, oh, remember we were talking the other day about something? Well, then I know it's legitimate. This is one of the most common ways for hacking computers. Getting back to social engineering, there has been a rash of cases of people that wanted to attack someone, and the way they do it is they steal their phone number. So I'm an attacker, and I want to attack Jim here, and I have a brand new phone here, and I call Verizon Wireless or AT&T, and I say, hello, my name is Jim Stowe. I lost my phone, and I got a new phone, and I'd like to activate this phone on my account. And it's surprisingly easy to do this, happens thousands of times.
If you
And-
don't have a PIN on your account.
Yeah, you need to have a PIN, and the more digits, the better. But it's surprisingly easy to talk your way. Now, I haven't done this personally, but lots of hackers have. They've gone into stores, and sometimes they've been in cahoots with employees. So they'll pay an employee at a Verizon store a fee to change the number without a PIN, for example. And then one day, Jim Stowe gets up in the morning and finds out his phone is dead, because all of his phone calls have been routed to my phone, and now I have his phone. So he has some website that he uses, and like his bank, for example, and Jim has been very smart, and he's turned on two-factor authorization, which is another thing you should always use if it's supported. When I log into my banking website, I put in my name, I put in my password, and then it sends a text to my phone with a number that I have to key in. Well, that's called two-factor authorization. It's not as good as it could be, but it's better than just having a password. But I already figured out Jim's password because he foolishly used the name of his cat, and I figured that out. So now that I've gotten his phone calls rerouted to my phone, I can log into his bank account. It says, do you want us to send you an access code to your cell phone? And it comes to my cell phone, and I can now get into his bank account. It sounds far-fetched. It's happened to lots of people. They've had their passwords stolen, their accounts stolen, their identity. They set up new credit card accounts in their name. They do all, from the history of mankind, as long as there's been locks, there's been somebody that wanted to pick the lock. We have time for one more question?
Okay, so I'm trying to understand this as a non-technical person. VPN is software that you download to different devices, as I understand it. So now, when my wife uses TeamViewer, she needs to have this VPN software on this this iPad she has, along with at the station site where she's logging in on TeamViewer. And so if that's correct, just nod your heads. But then the next thing is our transmitter room is right there with us in the station. So, and our tower's right on the building. So we don't need, if I'm understanding you correctly, VPN, because we're going by cable right to our transmitter room out through the tower. Is
You
that
don't
all
need a
correct?
VPN inside your building. So
Yes.
you have everything in one building there.
Right.
So you don't need a VPN. And the VPN is for when you're remote, when you're somewhere else.
Right.
If you're at home,
Right now.
across the parking lot from your church.
Yeah.
And you have your tablet there.
Yeah.
Your VPN is going to connect you. So your firewall has to support this functionality. So your VPN software that you put on your whatever device you have is going to communicate with your firewall at the church.
Okay.
And then once that's set up and running, it's just like you're in the church building.
Okay.
And you can access anything in the church building that you want to access.
Okay.
You can be on the other side of the country, and you can VPN in, and it's like Jim said, it's like an imaginary cable
Right.
that has you plugged in. So you're not connecting to a particular device on your network. You're connecting to your network through your firewall. So now you can do anything you could do if you were on the premises.
So now that brings me to the other question is you talked about we're in a hotel. We're using hotel Wi-Fi. Would it be better to be what do they call it? Hotspot and go through that way versus hotel? Or
Well, that's one solution. If you have sufficient data, my recommendation for everyone that is using a public internet service, whether you're at a coffee shop or a hotel, et cetera, on all of my wireless devices, I pay for a subscription for the company is Private Internet Access, and it is a VPN. What it does is when I turn that on, it enables all of the traffic from my device that's going out to the internet to go through a tunnel between me and that company, and then it goes from that company out to the internet. My traffic is encrypted and concealed. So anytime I use a public, whether it's at McDonald's or Starbucks or a hotel, the first thing I do on my laptop, the first thing I do on my iPad is I open up the private internet access app and I turn it on, so that I have a VPN tunnel out to that company. There are others. NordVPN
Do you have
is
an idea
another.
what something like that costs?
Last time I did it was very inexpensive. It's about $30 a year. So it gave me a great comfort level.
I just have one additional question related to that human engineering. There's an Indian scammer deal going on that causes pop-ups to come onto your computer that says the Microsoft alert, you need service, call our 800 number or call a number, and usually somebody with an Indian accent will answer the phone, and they're from Microsoft, supposedly, or HP or Dell, and they know who you are. They know your model number of your computer, they know your name, they may know your address, they know because there was a hack on the Hewlett-Packard database, and I think Dell was also included on a separate hack. But if they start asking you for information and want to have you dial in or go to a site like a TeamViewer, there are TeamViewer clones out there that they want to have you download on your computer and give them the username and password. And as soon as you do that, you're giving them an open license into your computer, and that computer may be part of your local area network in your production area or in your studio or in where your automation is. And as soon as you do that, they're taking, they first embed virus software on your computer and at the same time steal information from private files on your computer. So just to...
So the bottom line is, look, the IRS is not going to call you. Microsoft, they're not going to call you. You can't even call them. They're certainly not going to call you. And they try to call Microsoft and get help sometime. None of these companies are going to call you. We used to have years ago a scam that was going around where they would call and they'd say, yeah, it's the copier company. We're just checking on your copier. We're not sure what model you have. We lost our records. And you say, well, it's a X1000. Okay, thank you very much. Well, then about a week later, they'd call back and they'd say, yeah, it's the copier company. We're calling to send you your supplies for your X1000 copier. And now they know what copier you have. And a huge number of unsuspecting people will say, okay, yeah, we're calling to send you your regular monthly order of supplies. Would you like us to send it? Well, a huge number of companies will say, okay, sure. So they'd send us supplies and they'd send a bill, and a large number of companies would just pay it. Now, I got a call once at my home office years ago where I didn't even have a copier, and they said, can you tell us the number of your copier? And I said to the guy, how does it feel to be a crook? And he said back to me, it feels great, and he hung up. But if they call you, I mean, you know, we get so many calls, people trying to sell you something, they want something, it's almost not worth it to answer the phone. And
I actually don't answer my phone. I wait for it to go to voicemail, and then I'll call back if I want to. If they leave a voicemail.
Okay. Thank you. Because if you keep talking, everyone's going to go to sleep. So knock it off. No, thank you. Cybersecurity, thank you, guys. Next year, we will add another session for that. Next year is in Kansas City. Look forward to ribs and fellowship. And Lord bless you guys. Let's pray and have a safe trip home. Lord, thank you again for this conference and for those serving, for Pastor Lloyd's staff. Lord, what a great time of fellowship. Lord, that you would protect us as we do your work. Lord, as you protect us as we go home. And Lord, that you would continue to use us for the kingdom of God. We love you, Lord, and we thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you, guys. Appreciate you. It'll eventually be, yeah. We'll get that.